Hey there, Mike Robbins here. Thanks so much for joining me for this episode of the podcast. Once again, this week, I am recording the podcast and going live on social media simultaneously. So, this isn't something that I do all that often, but have decided to do that today. So, if you're joining live on Facebook or LinkedIn or YouTube, feel free to drop a comment and or a question. I might have a chance to respond to you. And if you're listening to the podcast episode, um, welcome. I hope you, your team, and everyone around you are doing as well as possible. I'm recording this on the 15th of February, Tuesday. This will post as a podcast probably tomorrow on the 16th. But happy Valentine's Day, a day or two late. And today I want to talk a bit about healthy discomfort. Healthy discomfort. So I've been thinking a lot about this recently on a couple different levels. I mean, the new year has been, here we are in 2022 for 6 weeks or so now, a month and a half. And, um, I spent a good amount of time over the holidays and in the kind of year end, year completion time, really doing a lot of reflecting and kind of soul searching, as I often do, but just wanting to let go of a lot of the stress and burden and intensity and trauma and challenge of the last, year and a half, almost 2 years with COVID and a lot of different things that have happened personally and professionally for me. And in that process, of forgiving and releasing and doing all that, I also kind of took on some, for lack of a better way to describe them, New Year's resolutions, although I don't usually like to use that word, but had some different goals and intentions for myself and also wanted to really start some practices, some habits. I did an episode a few weeks ago about some of the stuff that I learned reading or listening to the audiobook, I should say, of James Clear's Atomic Habits book. But so doing so is, it's been, related to sleep and to exercise and to meditation and to diet and some of the basics, but the important ones and things that I tend to struggle with at times and have definitely struggled with over COVID. And so I've been thinking about this both in regards to myself physically, but also my business and my life. And as a husband and a father, like I understand this notion of, getting comfortable with being uncomfortable and how important that is. Um, I talk about that a lot. I advocate for that a lot. But being the kind of all or nothing, hot and cold kind of person that I can be, sometimes I notice that I don't really have that in balance, meaning I will avoid discomfort completely in certain areas of life or for certain times, just like I'm not willing to be uncomfortable. Or then I'll sort of flip a switch and then it's all about kind of pushing myself. It comes from the athlete days of no pain, no gain, like just do everything. Everything's got to be hard and a struggle. And it's like I'm trying to find a third path, or maybe there's many more than just three paths. But if one path that I can take at times is like, I don't want to be uncomfortable physically, mentally, emotionally, just practically, financially. Otherwise, like I'm not willing to take risks. I'm not willing to try new things. I'm not. And there are times that I'm not for a variety of reasons. I feel scared. I feel tired. I feel a lot of different things that'll stop me from that. Sometimes it's just lazy or whatever. And then on the flip side, the sort of no pain, no gain, push hard, hustle, 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 go, 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 which I definitely have a tendency to do. And in short spurts and at certain times, that can be really valuable and necessary. But I often do it to my own detriment and burn myself out and literally have hurt and injured my body and gotten myself sick in the past doing that, as I'm sure maybe you've had experiences with that as well. And so one of the things that I've been doing is I have been challenging myself, eating a little differently, exercising a little bit differently, a little more, pushing myself in certain areas in that regard. And a couple things happened within the last week that were interesting for me, not that big of a deal in the scheme of things, but one of the things that I've started to do again, which I did many years ago, is these interval runs. Like I'll go out running for just like 20 minutes and use my watch on my phone, stopwatch. I used to use an old school, digital stopwatch that I wore on my wrist. But, when you sort of run for a couple minutes to warm up and then it goes from like 6 for a minute and then 7 on a scale from 1 to 10, 8, 9 in terms of effort level. And then you go back down to 6 and then 7, 8, 9, and then back down to 6. And you keep doing that all the way till you end like the 18th minute, you're at a 10. And then the 19th minute, you're back to like a 5 or a 6. And It's a great workout mentally, but also physically, because you sort of push yourself as much as you can, and then the more you do it. But what I've been noticing is, like, I hadn't done that for years, so the first few times I did it, my body was a little out of whack and sore, and then I did it a few more times and it felt better and got stronger. And then within the last week, I've had some real soreness in my Achilles or then my knee or my hamstring, and this may again seem like a small thing, but there are 2 different times I've gone out to run, and as I've started, I've gotten a minute or 2 in, and I felt some pain in my legs, and I stopped, which again may sound like a totally normal, rational thing to do, but that's not something I normally would have done in the past. I would have just pushed through it. "Suck it up, man. It's just a little pain, like, get over it. Go for it." And I don't know where that comes from. Again, maybe it's some of my old coaches, maybe it's some of just the athlete in me, but I in both cases, I stopped and I decided, "Okay, I'm just gonna go for a long walk, or I'll go back home and do something else that won't have impact on these parts of my body." And I say that because for me, it's like I think I'm starting to inquire into this. What is healthy discomfort? What is that sweet spot sort of where I'm not avoiding any pain or discomfort? I'm not avoiding things that are hard or scary, but I'm not sort of maliciously or sadistically just causing myself pain and then talking really harshly to myself, just suck it up, push through it. And again, I mean, it's not that I've never really inquired into this or grappled with this, but I do think that it's a really challenging but important art form, if you will, for all of us. And if you think about yourself, and this can vary in different areas of our lives at different moments in our lives, but I think we all know that without a little bit of discomfort, we're not going to grow, we're not going to change, we're not going to evolve. And at the same time, we can put ourselves in such painful situations or struggle, somehow thinking that's um, a good or noble thing to do, that we can end up hurting ourselves literally, which I've had the experience of doing many times. I'm imagining you have at times as well. And so, Brene Brown talks about healthy striving versus hustling. I think that's another good distinction to think about. Like, healthy striving isn't about, I'm going to work myself to the bone. I'm going to compete with everyone around me. I'm going to compare myself to everyone. That's the hustling, which I know a lot about hustling, by the way. And again, some of it for me as an athlete, I spent all those years playing baseball, and maybe some of it's just my personality type. Maybe some of it's as I got further along into junior high and high school and then into college and then professional baseball. I wasn't the biggest, I wasn't the strongest, I wasn't the fastest, I didn't have the best, like I wasn't given these physical gifts that I could just rely on those things. So there was an element of I felt like I had to work hard, I had to hustle in order to sort of keep up. And there's some positive elements of that and there's some negative ones. And I all these years later, long past my professional baseball career, I still notice that that's something that I grapple with. Like, oh, maybe I'm not the most talented or the most gifted or have the most just easy opportunities that come my way, but I'll hustle, I'll work hard, and again, there may be some truth and some reality to that to some degree. And there's a part of that that can be important and essential and even noble or admirable, as weird as it might be to say those things. But also, there's kind of an insatiable nature to the constant hustling, the constant pushing. And what I've also learned about myself, and maybe you can relate to this too, it's like pushing and working hard isn't always, by the way, being uncomfortable or pushing ourselves past our perceived limits or our comfort zone. But if you think about it physically, like, one of the things that I'm not, um, an expert in physiology or exercise per se, although I've had lots of instructors and trainers and coaches and people over the years. What I know about, you know, pushing ourselves physically is we do have to, whether it's running or yoga, whether it's, Pilates or spin, whether it's, weightlifting or rock climbing or anything, right? There is an element of taxing our muscles, pushing our muscles, breaking them down to some degree. There's a little bit of pain, there's a little bit of burn, and then there's the rest and recovery part. Pardon me as I almost knock over a glass here. There's the rest and recovery part, right? That's as important, if not more important, than the actual pushing exercising because it's in the rest and recovery where we build. But if we don't push past a certain limit, we're not going to build. But it's also, again, if you've ever done an activity or an exercise too much, you'll know, oh, I went past the point of sort of that healthy soreness into the point of actually injuring myself. And I think, again, life is different than exercise, although that's something that we do. But that to me seems like a good metaphor. How do we push ourselves past our limit, perceived or otherwise, to the point where there is a little bit of burn, a little bit of risk, maybe in some cases a little more risk, but not to the point where we're really going to injure ourselves or hurt ourselves. And where that line is, I don't always know. I can't always tell. And sometimes we don't know until we go too far or we realize we haven't gone far enough. But I do think there's a healthy place for us to come to as it relates to discomfort, challenging ourselves, being willing to embrace those sweaty palm conversations that I talk about, being willing to take some risks and go for some things and put ourselves out there. And what's interesting for me at this moment in my life, I just celebrated my 48th birthday last Monday. In some ways, I find I have more courage and more confidence than ever to do certain things and take certain risks. And in other ways, I notice that at times I have less confidence and less courage. And some of that just has to do with general fear, the fear of losing things that I've built or created, the fear of falling, the fear of, and some of it, even just thinking of the physical analogy, it's like my physical body isn't the same physical body that I had when I was 28 or 18 or whatever, right? So there are certain limitations to it or certain differences, wanting to be mindful. I mean, one of the reasons I stopped running and doing those interval runs was I just felt like I was struggling to make sure I could keep my body safe and healthy and strong and flexible to do that. So I opted for some different activities. But going back to it has been a little scary, but also kind of rewarding to remind myself, oh, I can still do that if I do it in a healthy way, if I'm mindful, if I'm safe. So, what does that look like for you? What do you find? Where is that balance point or that tension point for you with respect to kind of a healthy version of discomfort? Are you aware of that physically, mentally, emotionally, professionally, financially, relationally, communication wise? It's easy for us. And look, I say this also in the context of, here we are almost 2 years into the pandemic with all that has brought into our lives and our work, with all the exhaustion and the stress and the uncertainty and everything. So, I've been saying this for many months here on the show. Like, I don't think any of us are playing with the full deck right now and haven't been for a while. And that's not an excuse. I think it's just a reality of the weariness, the tiredness. So, again, if we're finding it harder to push ourselves into that place of discomfort and we're needing some rest and some relaxation, I totally get it. I totally get it. And I can relate. I think it's a process of just checking in with ourselves. Where are we right now? Where do we want to be? And, another thing that Brene Brown likes to say that I love is, you can't get to courage without walking through vulnerability. So vulnerability is really that space of like risk, emotional exposure, uncertainty. It's that discomfort and figuring out how deeply we allow ourselves to go into that discomfort, not because we can't handle it, but what's the healthy version of that? What's healthy striving, healthy pushing versus some sadistic, no pain, no gain thing. And again, I'm continuing to refine that for myself at this moment in my life, which changes, but finding that place of pushing past my comfort zone, but not pushing so far that I put myself at real risk in a negative way to potentially harm myself or hurt myself. And again, sometimes we don't always know until it happens. I was watching the Super Bowl over the weekend and I didn't really have a strong rooting interest in it. I think I wanted the Bengals to win more than the Rams, but I didn't really care that much. But there was a moment in the first half where Odell Beckham Jr., a receiver for the Rams, who had caught a touchdown and another great pass and was looking like he was going to have a great game, and the Rams were really rolling. He ended up tweaking his knee on what looked like a relatively benign play. Like he didn't get hit. His shoe got his, cleat got caught in the turf. And I don't know the extent of it, but he ended up having to come out of the game. He limped off the field and he missed the second half. And it was really, sad for him and disappointing for their team. And it changed the trajectory of the game. And he's one of their best receivers. But I was just thinking about, wow, of all the moments for that to happen and for the play that it happened on, it's like, it wasn't like he took this brutal hit and that would explain it. It was like a misstep and it could have happened at any moment at practice or walking down the stairs. So there's risk involved in everything. That what he did in that moment didn't seem overtly risky, although you could argue playing, professional football has got a ton of risks involved in it. But to me, I felt for him as a former athlete and just as a human being. But I was thinking about that in life. It's like we can't put bubble wrap around ourselves and fully protect ourselves from anything, heartache, loss, disappointment, failure, COVID, injury, illness, you name it, loss. But the more we can consciously and deliberately look to take some calculated risks, put ourselves out there, lean into discomfort, be willing to ask for things, try things, have conversations that maybe scare us a little bit, and know that even if we fail or even if it's painful, we'll grow in the process. But for me, what I'm practicing right now is figuring out where's that healthy place of discomfort that's not about avoidance, that's not about not wanting to feel any pain or any pressure, but it's also not about pushing myself to the extreme to the point where I'm now just doing it for the sake of doing it or for some kind of ego edification. So, anyway, I invite you to look at this dynamic in your own life as a leader, in your career, as a friend, a family member, a parent, if you are just a human being, as we continue to navigate through this tricky, odd, uncomfortable, uncertain time, hopefully moving our way through to the other side of COVID, but no real idea when and how that's actually going to manifest itself. So be kind to yourself. Be gentle and compassionate as you reflect on this. This is not about judging ourselves or being harsh or critical. This really is about being more aware and then making some adjustments so we can ultimately grow and change in the most positive ways possible. Thanks for listening to the podcast and watching on live stream. If you did, there's a bunch of links in the show notes to the podcast to stay connected with me. The best place to do that is at our website, which is mike-robbins.com. And if you are listening to the podcast here, we always love it when you leave a rating or a review right here in whatever podcast app or platform you happen to listen to. And if you're following on social, thanks for doing that. Make sure also on the podcast to hit the subscribe button so you don't miss any episodes. I'll be back next week with another episode on the podcast and hopefully another social live. I'm grateful to each and every one of you for listening, for watching, for being engaged with me and my work. Until next time, keep showing up as best as you can. And remember, we're all in this thing together.